Welcome to Patty's Aquatics. So today what I want to do is talk about dirty tanks. But more specifically, I want to talk about really what to expect after you set one up. Now, I did do a video about this about a year ago, which I can link above, but I want to add to that a little bit. Now, that one was just really about what to expect in the first days to weeks after setting one up. Since I have my oldest dirty tank is almost 5 years old, I kind of want to show from day one all the way to year 5, really the things I've seen and experienced over that period of time, so you can really get a handle on what to expect if you're first setting one of these up. So stick around. So like I said, I want to help explain and share some of my experiences I've had with keeping these dirted style tanks over the first 5 years. So my hope with this video is that if you had any questions or expectations, or you weren't really sure if something was going on in your aquarium was normal, that maybe it'll answer some questions for you. But before we get going, there's one thing we need to talk about, is that there are so many variables from tank to tank. From the soil makeup, your cap, how many plants, your fish, your lighting, the type of water you have, that there is no way to really pinpoint from one tank to another. So the things that I'm experiencing, the things that I'm going to share with you in this video may not be happening to you because of any little slight or major difference. So we just need to keep that in mind. But for the first thing I want to talk about again is going back to that day one, initially after you first set up that dirted tank, and those water parameters. So the first thing you need to know when you first set up a dirted tank is that your water parameters may jump around a little bit. You may have ammonia or nitrates in your water, and it's completely and utterly okay, and it's normal. That's why it's so important that you make sure you put lots of stem plants in your aquariums. That's what's going to help pull that all out of the water column, and they're going to feed off of it, and they're going to use that. That's why it's always said when you put up dirted tanks to make sure you put lots of stem plants. And that's the number one reason. But the other thing I like to use are floating plants. Floating plants are huge. Floating plants pull so much of that out of the water column as well. And I love them, and it really doesn't make a difference what type of floating plants you use. Now mine are primarily duckweed. I do use some Sylvania minima, but duckweed is much of a pain in the butt that it really is. It does do a wonderful job in pulling those excess nutrients out of the water column. It's just a pain in the butt getting it out of your aquarium and maintaining it, but that's besides the point. So water parameters jumping around is definitely something that it can be an issue in what you can expect when you first initially pull them out. Now, testing water, that's going to be another thing we can talk about briefly. I don't test my water just to test it. Now, if there's some kind of issue within my aquarium, I'll test my water. When I first set up a new aquarium and I put new fish in it, I put fish in right away. I don't wait to cycle an aquarium. I put them in there because if you have enough plants in here with initially, they're going to do their job and they're going to pull those water parameters out. But what I will do is I test the water here or there just to make sure there's no crazy spikes of ammonia or nitrate that might affect the fish, the health of the fish. Now that's the only reason. Otherwise, I really do not test my water at all. It really shouldn't be something you try to fight or something that you try to battle with, because you don't want to chase water parameters. A tank is going to level out eventually, which we'll talk about later with balancing. It's going to find its sweet spot. It just needs to take its time to do it. So there's really no way around it, but just monitoring it to see if your fish are okay. Other than that, there's really nothing to worry about. So that's really the initial stages with first setting up with water parameters. But with that, with having all these excess nutrients within your water column, that's going to lead to the two things that most people that I hear of when they complain about these dirted style tanks. And then one of them is algae. Now, algae, like I said, is one of the big things that I hear about why some people don't like dirted tanks, because they get so much algae. Now, I know there are some people that do different things within their soil makeup in order to help try to prevent that some. Now, it's just something that does happen within the aquariums and the way I set them up. Now, again, there's many variables around that and why you can get them. Your lighting, obviously, you're going to have so many excess nutrients within the water column. So again, that kind of goes back to making sure you have lots and lots of stem plants within your aquarium to help pull that out. Now, in this aquarium here, this is my puffer tank. When I first set this one up, I put nowhere near as many stem plants in here as I should have, and it was a disaster, and it's been causing almost a year-long battle with algae and cyanobacteria, which has popped up as well here or there. Now, because of that, I didn't have enough stem plants, so that excess nutrients in the water column thrived. The plants weren't eating enough of it, and the algae fed off of it, and the algae thrived. So that is a big thing, to make sure that you have lots of floating plants, lots of stem plants within your aquariums when you first set it up, to help try to curb that. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get algae. You very well may be, but algae is pretty easy to pull out. The major algae that I get within these aquariums is basically like a string hair algae, which pulls off from the plants pretty easily. So that's been the biggest thing. Now, cyanobacteria, like I talked about, I've battled in this aquarium for, like I said, dang near a year. I've done so many things to try to get rid of it. I finally just turned my lights down and I just let it, and it wound up going away on its own. So that's definitely something that you need to keep in mind, and expect that you probably will get algae after setting these up. But again, it comes back to the balance of these aquariums. They're always looking to balance themselves, and they will eventually, as long as you don't keep mucking with it or changing things. It's like an ecosystem, a natural ecosystem. Eventually, it's going to settle in and be good. It's just those first few months can be a little touchy, but once you get past that, it's usually golden and great. But besides algae, what's the other big complaint that I hear myself when it comes to these? That's cloudy water. Now, cloudy water is one of the other things, or the major complaints I ever hear when it comes to dirted aquariums. Now, like I said before, with variables, there are so many ways and differences between those tanks. I do not use filters. I don't use air. Now, if you use a filter in your dirted aquariums, maybe you won't experience the same thing as me, but I've experienced it almost every single one of my dirted aquariums since I set them up. Now, cloudy water for me will pop up within the first weeks to months of first setting it up. It's not permanent, but sometimes it takes quite a while for it to go away. It can last from weeks to months, like I mentioned. Now, this aquarium itself with my Oscar lasted for almost 3 months of cloudiness. It was so disappointing to be able to look at this tank and just see one big cloud with this guy up front always begging for food, barely being able to see my plants. And it took about 3 months, and just like that, overnight, gone, clear. It balanced itself. Now, to explain that a little bit, I used the analogies a while back in an old video. Picture yourself on a chair. You're a balanced ecosystem sitting on that chair. Each leg is a different component to that aquarium ecosystem, whether it be the fish, the plants, the substrate, the micro and macro organisms within it. If you take one of those components out, or you hurt it somehow, it's not completely level, you're going to fall off that chair or be unbalanced, so to speak, and that balance of that ecosystem will not be right. It needs to find its balance between all those components within your aquarium to fully make itself run great and look awesome. And sometimes that takes time. It takes patience, and that's one of the biggest things I have a hard time with when cloudy water, because I don't like looking at it, but I know it'll go away eventually. Now, there ain't much you can do about it. Sure, you can change your water, but it's going to come right back because the problem is not solved. You can put chemicals in there. I don't like that route, and quite frankly, I don't think it really helps, because it's just going to wind up happening again. You can use UV sterilizers. Now, with them, yes, will it take the cloudiness away? But if the whole ecosystem within that aquarium is not balanced yet, it's just going to come right back. Now I can show you an example of this cloudy water in my newest tank I set up about 2 months ago. So as you can see, this tank is so cloudy, it's terrible. I can see clearly down at the bottom, but since I do not have filters, the cloudiness just sits at the top of the aquarium, and it just sits like that, and it just is what it is. But I know it's going to go away. It's not hurting my fish. It's not hurting the inhabitants. The most that it does is it kind of diffuses the light from hitting the bottom of the tank, so your plants might suffer a little bit. But other than that, the cloudy water isn't going to do anything. You just need to have that patience, like I mentioned before, for it to right itself, to be able to sit there for those weeks or months, however long it takes, because every single one, like I said, overnight I'll wake up and all of a sudden it'll be crystal clear. It'll be no different with this one. So just know that you could have cloudy water with the new setup within those first weeks to months. It happens in every single one of my tanks. I would say at least 90% of them. So just something to keep in mind. So another thing that you could expect is that gas bubbles can be released from the substrate, and not only is it okay, it's completely normal. Now, if you do water changes, let's say, that pressure change from taking water down and bringing it up will also release gas up from the substrate. And another thing that I had seen once in one aquarium I set up probably almost a year ago, it was a 2.5 gallon small one. The substrate lifted up like very high, like a huge hill. It was all that trapped gas underneath it. So what I did is I just took a small thin tool and just popped it, poked it in the substrate, and it released all that gas up. So that is not only, like I said, it's not only okay, it's normal. Don't worry about that. It's definitely something to expect, especially in those probably the first year. So now that we talked about really what to expect after first initially setting up one of these dirted tanks, from those first weeks to months, what happens after that? What are we expecting from then to year 5, which is the oldest aquarium that I have of these dirted tanks? You know, once we achieve that balance, like I mentioned, your aquarium will settle down. Things will start to just go great. You can sit back and relax and really enjoy it. You know, the cloudy water is going to be gone. The majority of that algae is going to be gone. Your plants are going to be flourishing. Your fish are going to potentially be breeding. Now, what's the next thing? The next thing is, well, you're going to start to accumulate mulm at the bottom of your aquarium. So what do you do with that? Well, the varieties of mulm and how much of it, well, there's many different ways you can talk about it. Now, have you added a food web to your aquarium? That's one thing to talk about. All that leaf litter is going to cause lots of mulm at the bottom of your aquarium. Now, mulm is not a bad thing. Mulm is actually a very good thing. That is the fuel for your plants. That's the fuel for that soil layer underneath your cap. That's going to work its way down through that sand cap into the dirt and feed it. That's what this whole thing is about. That organic matter that's broken down, working its way through that cap into your soil and feeding that soil and keeping it alive. So what happens though if this gets so thick? If you get such a thick layer of mulm? Now, I haven't personally seen that thick of mulm before, but I have seen some tanks from others on YouTube that just let it go and it gets enormously high. Now, I can't speak for anyone else. I'm almost positive I've heard Father Fish talk about this before, whether it was in a live stream or in a video, but I remember him saying that if the mulm ever gets too thick and excessive, it's okay to pull some of it out of there, whether you're using a turkey baster or maybe just taking your siphon and siphoning some of it out of there. I will say that I have taken mulm out of some of my aquariums before. Mostly it's usually out of the front if it gets so excessive. Now, what are some of the variables again, as we're talking about variables? If you use filters, you may not have as much mulm or at all. Now, in this aquarium, I have this wave maker. It's right there. And it pushes the water flow this way, which in turn, all the mulm winds up building up in this corner here. Sorry for the glare. So it's okay. Like I said, that's going to work its way down. There's really nothing to worry about it with it though. So excess mulm is okay as long as it's not getting like so thick, because that's going to create another dirt layer on top of your cap. And you want that to work its way down through the cap into the substrate. That's its main goal. So you do with that information whichever you prefer. Like I said, I rarely ever done it. I've done it in a few aquariums, not many, but keep in mind, if you are putting the food web in here, you are creating more mulm and more biolife for the microfauna and macrofauna. Your snails and your shrimp are absolutely going to love it. Your fish are going to love it. Your fish eat out of it too. There are so many nutrients and microorganisms within it that it feeds the entire tank, not only the soil. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, I personally, if it gets way too thick, will remove some of it, but it's definitely not a necessity, and it's something to expect as your tank ages that mulm is going to appear. Again, variables. Unless you're keeping filters in your aquariums or something like that, you may not experience the mulm like I do. Well, the next thing I want to talk about is really the longevity of one of these aquariums. This is my oldest tank. This one's 5 years old. Now, a lot of the things I've read and seen is basically they say after anywhere from a year to 5 years, they are going to use up all the nutrients within the soil of these aquariums, and you no longer will get the plant growth you used to, and then you have to use fertilizers. Well, I can say with this one going on 5 years, I've never had that issue. My plants are still thriving and growing, and it is one working and breathing ecosystem within here. Now, if you look closely, there are some dying dwarf sage leaves within it. That has nothing to do with the nutrient level within this aquarium. Now, what that has to do with is my own laziness sometimes, because the biggest thing you have to do when it comes to these aquariums sometimes is trimming plants and getting rid of that duckweed, which is love and hate relationship with myself. If I let this dwarf sage go too long, it grows and drapes over the top, it cuts off light, and then my plants suffer a little bit. So I got to keep it trimmed up. So that's the reason for that. But this tank itself is just going crazy. Growing, it looks more beautiful as the years go on. Now, if you can see, I do have a little bit of algae in back. Now, that is because, again, we're going to go back to those variables. This is a 20-gallon long aquarium, so it's not very deep. I have a light directly on top the tank. If you notice that algae that you see, it's all along the light because it's getting excess light there so that algae thrives. But I'm okay with it because these fish I have in here, which are my rare Matano rice fish, I've seen a few eggs on them in the past. So they're using that as a little breeding area, which in turn is okay because that algae is going to house microorganisms which can feed those fry. It's a place for the fry to be able to hide in and not get eaten by their moms and dads here. And it's just one, like I said, it's one big breathing, working ecosystem within itself. So I can say that this tank has been doing great. Now, I haven't even used the fatherfish additive in this one. Now, again, variables. People use all different types of soils within these aquariums. I use only 2 parts organic potting soil to 1 part organic compost. I do add a little bit of Osmocote, which is a time-release fertilizer, to kind of help jumpstart it and let it go for a little bit, but I've never had issues so far with the nutrient levels within this aquarium. And I'm hoping it doesn't continue because it's working. As you can see, there is some mulm at the substrate level. There's not an astronomically a lot, but what it's doing is it's working its way down. It's working its way down and feeding that soil, and it's all working together in unison. Like I mentioned before, we're sitting on that chair that I talked about before, and this tank is the perfect example of everything working perfectly and balancing itself out to give you this great aquarium to be able to sit back and enjoy and watch. So far at year 5, longevity has not been an issue. So those are some of the things that I've seen and experienced over the past 5 years of keeping dirty tanks, and I hope some of them may help you if you're looking for answers of what to expect after you set yours up. Now, that being said, like I mentioned numerous times throughout this video, there are so many variables through aquarium to aquarium that you just need to keep that in mind, and you're always looking for that perfect balance within your aquariums. That is always the goal really for any aquarium, but it's the goal for these dirted aquariums because that's where you're going to be most successful. Is you want that balance of everything working in unison and creating that natural, awesome ecosystem for you to sit back and enjoy for years and years to come. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button if you're not subscribed to the channel. Also, I'm offering memberships to my channel, so if you're interested, hit that join button to be part of the family. And always remember to think outside the box and take a step back in the nature. I hope to see you next time here at Patty's Aquatics.